Good afternoon, colleagues and friends from around our beautiful state. I hope you all are having a wonderful day today. I am so glad to be joining and leading our conversation today about data insights and creating amazing visual aids using data and Excel, something that we normally have access to. So this is going to be a very empowering session, and this is a session that's going to be part two of a two-part series, and we're going to dive into this together. And we're actually going to do some working sessions, and we're going to talk about how to figure out structure and understanding our data, but then also creating a way that allows us to add more data to it without having to redo all those calculations over and over and over again. And I think that's one of the greatest opportunities that we have together. I'd like to thank all of you for attending on behalf of IPDay and our Tech Tuesday webinar. So this is going to be a way for us to dive into our data and our analytics together, and I'm looking forward to this opportunity today. So when we work through this is going to be a way we can communicate. You can go ahead and type any question that you have into the Q&A, and I am watching. I have several ways to look at this, and I do enjoy this type of presentation. I love working with data. I love being able to help others understand structure in their data and being able to empower them to learn how to rapidly do things without having to take long extended courses, because sometimes we just have to be able to find some structure for presentations, for the ability for us to measure our outcomes, for grants and proposals. So in this situation today, if you do not understand something, please write a message in the chat. I'll be more than happy to redo something. I can redo a calculation. I can reorient so that way you can see it. And you're more than welcome to do that. And I will be looking. And I definitely hope everyone that's here right now can even pop their names in there and say how you're doing and maybe where you're from. I love learning about our colleagues and our friends. I love seeing where everyone is from, and love the impact they're able to make together, because if it wasn't for everyone here, we would not be having the that we do in the state of Florida. The opportunity that we have going forward is going to be specific towards using a data sheet. And this is going to be a way for us to use Excel, and we've created this Excel document for us to work together. So all the data in here is going to be made up data. It's not real data. It is fictitious. So you'll be able to use this, and it's going to be available to you. I'm going to ask our colleague from IPDay, Joseph, at this point to post the link to the data set that we're going to use today for this interactive breakout session. Gosh, it's so great to see everyone, people from all over Florida, people from Jacksonville, Miami-Dade. Wow, we got some individuals that work in corrections, which is fantastic. Gosh, you guys are amazing. We got a lot of people from the Florida college system. I see a lot of districts as well, some technical schools. Gosh, that's fantastic. It's great to see all of us, awesome counties, awesome representation that we have here, which is great to see. Gosh, it's so nice to meet everyone virtually in this virtual experience. I was just telling our executive director, June, earlier that it's amazing how Florida can come together in this aspect to help each other and help us grow as an organization, as a moving force, and to support our endeavors in adult education. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why we're so strong. So this is an interactive data session today. So our colleague Joseph did post a link in the chat. So hopefully you're able to click on that link and then download the Excel. This is something that I created for us in our presentation today, and this is going to have some relevance towards adult education data. We're going to see data associated with attendance, because we know that's so important, and we're going to work through it to create some visual aids so we can understand what's going on in our data. So awesome! It's so great to see everyone. Gosh, a lot of great organizational representation here today. I'm loving this. So again, as I mentioned before, this is going to be part two of a two-part series. So we had on our last Tech Tuesday a open discussion about slicers and Excel, but if you didn't attend last week, that's okay. First of all, it's recorded and posted on the IPDay website, and you'll be able to watch that at any given time. And this session is also going to be posted for recording on the IPDay website too. So if you're one of an individual who likes to sit back and watch to entertain what's going on, that's okay. If you like to actively participate, that's going to be great as well. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for us to work and collaborate together, and there's always ways for us to go back and review what's being done here in another venue. So your mode of how you learn is going to be your choice, and just know there's a lot of assistance out there. Again, the overview of this is going to be our dynamic dashboards, how to create dashboards using simple tool like Excel. And Excel has advanced in a way that's allowed us to become very empowering to create dynamic dashboards that we don't have to use expensive softwares that maybe some of us don't have access to. And the best part, again, about what we're going to learn today is that how we can just drop in more data once we learn more about our students. And those Excel dashboards we're going to create are going to eventually ingest that data so it can produce those same outcomes, so you don't have to do it multiple times. So with us, if you didn't get the first part of the series, that's completely okay. We'll be able to work through this together, and we will be able to understand things, and I'll do a brief overview of what we covered last week. I did get some really great questions after our discussion, sorry, not last week, but the week prior, and some great questions that people email me, and I love the conversations. I love the opportunity to help others grow in a professional sense. So if there are questions that you receive after, you're more than welcome to email me as well, and we can engage and we can talk about opportunities. I had a great question that talked about age of students and age and data. So I'm going to actually hit on that today. I'll help you with a little calculated field to throw in some fun to this, and we're gonna talk about that as well. Gosh, it's great to see more people joining us from more areas across the state. It's so good to see you all. The data file that you have is going to be posted in the chat. If some of you I just see joined and popped in, I'm going to ask Joseph to repost that link one more time just to make sure that you have access to that Excel. And again, you can keep this Excel, you can work through it, you can make changes to it, you can try breaking it. If you do, that is completely okay. There's going to be nothing that is going to go wrong in this. Thank you, Joseph, for reposting the chat, the access to the data in the chat. This is ultimately what we're going to create, and we're going to do it pretty quickly. We can go through and show us. I'm going to be able to show you how to be able to do this. I'm going to hit on different type of visual aids because we talked a little bit last week about not only the ability for us to dive into data using slicers, which we learned is just a very fancy term for filters, and the ability for us to create slicers, but we're also going to learn how to join slicers for different visual aids. And in here, I'm going to show you these things only so you can remember how to do them later. So at this high level in the presentation, we will look at them only because we want to be able to reference them when we get into the Excel. But for purposes now, you are not expected to memorize or even apply this. Just remember that they're here. So we go into Excel and maybe you look at this a week later and you think, how did he do that? You'll be able to dive into here and hopefully remember pretty quickly after looking. It's great to meet you. Great to meet you, our friends from different areas. More people popping in. This is great. I love when people get excited about data. This makes me so happy. The discussion topic we had 2 weeks ago was about data slicers. And this is just a chart. This is just a screenshot of the traditional filters versus the new slicers. So we can see there in the left, that is a traditional filter method that we see in Excel tables. But as we're going to dive into this portion of our presentation, we're going to advance our ability to filter massive quantities of data using slicers. And these slicers are going to be what we can use to change the dimensions of the outcomes of the data, the filtering abilities of the data sets and the visual aids using one common filter tool. And that's where we can be really powerful and dive into our data. So in this, the first thing that I have to reference to everyone, and some people are a little apprehensive about this, and I get it because it's new and it's different, that in order for us to leverage slicers and for us to create these great visuals, all data have to be in the form of tables. And tables are a unique way of Excel recognizing a common data source. And that's just fancy words for saying that there's a source of data, there's some data that's going to be here, and we can actually name the tables too, so that way it can help us find them later on. And in this situation, the table is usually very easily identified because you see different row colors. And we can see there that we have a light hint of blue, and then we have a white, then a light hint of blue, and then a white. That's usually a good indicator that your data is in the form of a table. And we are going to create a table today. And I know some people have said, gosh, I'm a little worried. I don't know how to do that, but do not worry. In the circumstance that you have to create this table, we will give you the original data, and then I've also created the table for you, so that way you're never going to fall behind. So during all these different steps of our presentation today, If you don't get every step along the way and maybe you hit a blocker, that's okay. Just recognize that I've gone and we have created the correct outcome for you. So that way you can continue on with the presentation and we can work together through this. In this circumstance too, that's where we're going to be able to look at our table. We can actually name it. So there in the top left, I've circled in that blue, I've created a square around the table name data 3A. That's going to be where we can name tables. Again, I'm not asking you to do it now, but just to remember that under the table design header, we will be able to name the tables once we create them. And that's where we can name them. We can name them almost anything we want. We just can't use special characters and spaces, but we'll go through and talk about common errors we might see with creating tables as well. And that's where we can name tables that we can reference later on when creating these awesome visual aids. We will be able to have multiple tables, and in multiple tables, there can only be one common name. So we can't create data table 3A and then data table 3 again. Excel says no, no, no. There can only be one table name per table, one table name per table. And that's something that we will practice here because I'm going to go through and make some common errors that people get. And sometimes these errors get us a little frustrated, but I'll show us how to overcome those in a very simple manner, and we will go through and make them together. So now let's go on to our data working session. I hope everyone is excited. If you could give me a 2 thumbs up, or maybe you're still here with me in the chat. That way I know you're all here and you're all excited. I love seeing excitement about this because awesome. I see some great hands. I appreciate you. I see some people that are excited. Thank you so much. I love being able to do this, and I love that you guys are here. I can't tell you in my experience now, I've been working with data for a long time. I'm a biostatistician by education and trade, and I never want the situation of people not being able to readily analyze and validate their outcomes. Then I never want there to be a blocker for organizations. So when we can empower each other to be successful in this manner, we can move mountains. And that's why I'm so glad to be here today. I'm glad I'm seeing all these smiley faces. Gosh, it's amazing. It's amazing. Oh, thank you for the nice comments. It's amazing to be able to share this together. And as I said, I'm always going to be available for team members to be able to help them at any time. So now, hopefully, if I can get a thumbs up, are you able to see my Excel? Are you able to see my Excel? Is that showing? If I get a thumbs up or a confirmation there, I always like to say, okay, I see a smiley face coming in. Awesome. Hopefully, we're able to see my Excel now. That's being displayed on the screen. Thank you so much, Don. Thank you, Josh, Joshua, Claudia. Thank you so much. Judy, I appreciate you. I always like to make sure that I'm showing everything in the correct way. Daisy, thank you. This is what we're going to create. So in here, this is going to be our visual of Super Smart Adult Education University Enrollment Dashboard. Dashboards are fantastic tools that we're able to dive into data. Just a quick review of what we did last time. We see here, this is something that I've created, and we're going to replicate this today. And in here, we can dive into the ability to change the outcomes of these visual aids. We're visual organisms. We like to see things and respond to the way they look. And that's important for us. I had some people that actually dove into this data from the last session, and they asked me about what I thought of the outcomes, and specifically here about GED completion by year. And I said that this is actually a fictitious data set, so this was something that was made up. But it had some interesting relevance because this is something that I've seen in different places specific towards completion. And this was a situation of, well, I don't see populations matching up, and I'm actually going to reference that today, that in here, this is a definitely a smaller numerical outcome than the total population we're looking at. And that's common because in this situation, this is something that someone asked me, we're not going to have everyone that's completing and getting their GED in our adult education university, Super Smart Adult Education University. But this does show situations of how many completed and then by the year of completion. I'm just going to dive into here and note some interesting aspects that maybe individuals might want to look at. I'm going to dive in here and I'm going to look and filter using my slicers for race black equal to Y. And notice when I do so, I'm able to dive into this and I'm able to change the visual outcomes because this is amending and changing the underlying data for every visual aid that we have on here, each visualization. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 visualizations on here that are all changed immediately by looking at changing this filter, this slicer. And noticing here, when I filter for the race black equals to Y, we can see that The completion in 2022 for GED went from 6 to 17, which is not too shabby, a little under 3 times the total value. Diving into this, you're really able to see some data outcomes, and hopefully just by playing around with this, you can realize that at any time you can reset your slicers and you can go back to your original data, which is something that is difficult to do in traditional Excel tables. And lo and behold, we're going to create this today. I'm hoping that we get to all 5, but sometimes I'm ambitious and we maybe won't get to all 5 of these visual aids. But the nice part is that if you right click anywhere along the bottom, so I'm right clicking along the bottom on any one of these tabs, you're going to see an ability to unhide. You're going to see an ability to unhide. So I always like to save the fun part to the end, but I don't want to keep anyone in suspense. If you unhide this all visualizations sheet, you will see this is the answers. This is going to be the final outcome of what we're going to create today. So do not worry if we don't get to it. It is here for you forever. I just hit it and I was going to make it a surprise, but I say, why wait to the end to make a surprise? So that's where the final outcomes we're going to create today are. So in the meantime, let's go ahead and dive into one important calculation. And this was a question that I got hosting a session for IPDA, and a colleague mentioned that in their data, they often never get the age of a student. And all that is reported is date of birth. So in our last session, we dove into this data, and this is the same data that we used from our last session, and we looked at field outcomes. And I'm just going to highlight some important ones. Student ID is unique to the row, so no student ID ever exists more than once, which is very important in the dynamic structure of the data, that every row line is a unique student ID. We call the names first name, last name here. Sometimes that's okay to be unique, but remember, we might have situations where we have the same student name listed more than once. My name's Michael Johnston. So there's not a lot of Johnstons out there, but sometimes I do get lucky and find that there's another one of me in big pools of data when you're dealing with large volumes. So that's something to think about too. But we have the unique student ID to really reference that unique row line. Here we have some important data about high school education, military status. We noted last time there was some empty data, which is sometimes a risk. We want to talk to those data report developers about. We never really want to have empty data. We want something to be there. We're going to dive over here and we see that we have total attendance hours. We like fields that have numerical outcomes. The reason being is we can find measures of central tendency. We can find averages. We can find medians. And that helps us really compare populations to see if we see statistical differences. And I love using data to improve. Often we have to use data to prove, but I love using data to improve. And that's where if we work ahead of the game and we empower our colleagues to be able to develop these independently, we can use data to improve. In the meantime, we have other fields. We have race of our students. We have citizenship. We have some information about their GED completion. Notice not every student has a GED completion outcome because not every student completed their GED in this data set. So that's why we have some blank spaces there. Again, if you see any questions that you're curious about, go ahead and type them in the chat. I'm monitoring all of that at the same time, and I never get offended. I love questions because that means that we're all thinking about this and we're advancing together. So in here, when we go through this, do not be afraid. If you do not get what I'm doing, don't get scared. I have gone through in all of the tabs and I have done the outcomes for you. So notice attendance, all student data 1, all student 1A, I created the age. And that's going to be our practice here. Some individuals said, hey, I can't get the age. They don't give me the age of the student. And the reason is age is a tough question in data because you may say, well, what's the age of the student today? I got my blue pen out to emphasize today. You can see it on my shirt. What is the age of the student today? And someone else may say, well, okay, that's great, but what's the age when the student started our program last year? Well, that's going to be a different calculation. And that's why so often in the reports developing side, those that are creating the data for us, people stay away from calculating age because age is really dependent upon the user and how they want the age calculated. So for today's practice, we're going to calculate the age as of today. So what is the age of the student as of today? I'm not going to take into account leap years. I got a question about that too. It was all the same question about leap years. And we could spend a whole session talking about calculating ages with using dates and leap years, but it's not going to make an impact in the long run for us. So I think for us today being able to calculate age is going to be so important. So let's work through that together. Colleagues, if you come over to your sheet, all student data 1A, I have created the formula for you to use. So if you have missed this, do not fret. If you feel that you just want to sit back and watch, it is here. And I have created this, and you'll be able to see in our data table 1A that we've put this in for every single outcome. So I've calculated that age as of today for the students that are in this row line. But we're going to do that together. The first step I want to do is that I want to create a column between column F and column G. So I identify column F and column G, and they're right here. I want to create a new column between F and G. If you haven't done that before, that's okay. We're going to show you two different ways of doing it. The first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to come over here to column G. I'm going to highlight the entire row. So I left click on the G, and I'm going to insert, right click, insert, and I get a new column. Do it one more time. Come over here, highlight column G, right click, insert, and I get a new column. That's all it is. If you don't like that method of right clicking, all you have to do is come to home. You scroll over to the right next to, and some of you may have these, some may not have the styles, but hopefully all of us have the cells. If you don't, at a later time, I could show you how to add that to your Excel. But if you don't have that, that's okay. In the situation where you do have this area under your home called cells, all you're going to do is click insert. It's going to know that you want to insert a column. And that will be the first step that we need. We'll be creating a column between F and G. And that is how we create this extra field for us. And we're going to create the calculation. So the first thing I'm going to do here is that I'm going to type equals. Equals is indicative of a calculated field. Equals is indicative of a calculated field or a formula. So it depends on whatever you appreciate more. And I always like to start my calculated fields with an open parentheses, and I'm going to type today. And today is a actual function in Excel. Today is a function. It's a type of a command, and it says return the current date. And the only thing that we have to do with this is that we have to type an open parentheses and a closed parentheses around today, and that's just part of the formalities. And that says what is the date as of today. I want to subtract, known as a date difference calculation. I want to subtract the days from today from the date of the student's birth. So I can either left click, or I can type F2. So if I type F2 here, it highlights this in blue. If I left click on it, it also highlights the cell. So whatever way you feel comfortable doing it, then you just close your parentheses. And when I hit enter, I say, oh my gosh, that's not what I wanted. I don't want this 4/14/1948 Excel. You're confused. Excel, you're confused. And the reason what happens here is Excel says, hey, it's okay. I know that you probably want a date, and that's what we're going to give you, but we're not going to ask you. And what actually happens here is that notice in this new calculated outcome where I have this formula, Excel defaulted up here in my cell type. So when I come over here to my cell type under my home, you get that to two different ways. You can either right click and go to format cells. You can do that and look at the number, and notice here under number, it shows date, or you can come up here and you can come through and click on the short date, or you can click on number. I'm going to convert this back to a number, and I get 17,637.00. Note, let me do that one more time. I come up to my date field type here. I drop down, I create a number, and I get 17,637.00. This is the amount of days that exist between the first day of 1900, January 1st, 1900, and it's the days between today and August 15th, 1975. We get 70,637. There's 70,637 days. And what Excel did is Excel actually calculates dates by adding that number to January 1st of 1900. And that means that this date added would be April 14th, 1948. So keeping this as a numeric field, I want to come in here and I want to divide. So I click the backspace. It's next to the shift key. And I type 365. I do that because I know I want to convert all the days to years. So I convert this to 365. And I get 48.32. 48.32. So if I want to apply this to every single one of my cells, all I do is that I come up here and notice my mouse is a wider plus. When I come over to the bottom right, I get a skinny plus. I get a skinny plus. So we get a wide plus, skinny plus. When I double click on the bottom right, this applies that formula all the way down my columns. And that is extremely powerful because I don't want to retype my formula. And notice here, I can see in every single one of these situations, the calculation that was used. And this right here is the student's age. For time's sake, because this is not a calculated fields formula class, there is a way for us to round down because we never round up a person's age. So we always, and in the situation where we round down, we can actually tell Excel to do that. And Excel can actually use that with a function. And I've put that here for you. And if you want to practice it on your own, that is how you can use the round down function, which basically says, take this value and whatever it is, never round up, always round down to the nearest integer. And that's something that I applied here. And that's just adding this round down in front of it with an extra set of parentheses indicating the age. So hopefully you feel a little comfortable with calculating the age, and you can replace today with any day. You could replace it with the first day of the semester, the first day of the academic period. You could replace it with the date the student graduated high school. There's any dates that you can use, and it will calculate the same outcome. You don't have to use today, and you use the same format of the day, month, year. I'm sorry, month, day, year. So hopefully that helps you. Now in our next step, we want to create a table. We want to create a table of our data. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is the first step to us creating this visual analytics. We are going to create a table. In the situation of this table, there are several ways for us to do it, and I wrote them all here. If you missed this, that's okay. I've created the table for you. So in all student data 2A is the table created for you, and 2, you can create it yourself. The first thing we want to do is if we want to create the tables, we want to highlight all of our data. So I can come up here, I can left click and drag all the way down to the bottom. And Excel tends to stop where the data ends. It tends to know that. So I would stop around row 330, column Z. So row 3, oh, sorry, not 330, column Z. I'll go a little bit farther. No, that seemed funny. Here we go. 330, column, oops. Let me do that one more time. There we go. So I go out to column AF. There we go. Column AF. I could drag. I don't drag my data often because that tends to happen what I just did. You can do that way. And once you've highlighted all of your data and only your data, you can come up here to insert and click table, insert table. And that will say, hey, I think this is the table you wanted. And it gives a nice green moving box that surrounds your data. And it says, hey, would you confirm where this is? And you could look at it and just make a quick roll and say, oh yeah, this is where my data actually starts and ends. And then lastly, it says, does your table have headers? And headers is just a fancy term for field names. So does my data have headers? Does it have field names? Yes, it does. Excel takes that into account. So if I click OK, it has now converted my data to a table. But notice, I may want to work with larger data where I don't have the time to drop and drag and point and drag. And just like I did the first time, I missed some data because I was pointing and dragging. So in this circumstance, you can also hit Control plus A anywhere in your table. If I hit Control, holding down Control and hit A, all of the data in my table is highlighted. And as you can see, as I scroll out and scroll down, I have all of my table highlighted. I can do the exact same thing, and I can go and hit Insert, Table. I just say, yes, this is my table. It has headers. I click OK, and it converted all my data to a table. And notice we can actually see the table name here in the top left. So this automatically defaulted to table 8 because I've had 7 tables before, so it defaults to the next one. But I could create this and call it Mike table or table, happy. You can call it whatever thing you want. You just can't use special characters, and I'll show an example there too. For those that like using those quick keystrokes, if you Control A, and then do Control T, hold Control T, that will add the table automatically. So for those that like quick keystrokes, Control A plus Control T will add the table. And here I can call this table anything I want to. I can call it happy table, like that. I can call it happy table. Notice if I try to put happy space table, it's going to say, no, you can't do that. You can't use a space. You can't use special characters. A lot of people get very alarmed when they see these alerts. Don't get alarmed. It's okay. Just come back and say, oh, thanks for fixing it for me, Excel. I don't want that space. And it goes and converts it for you. So now my data in 2A is happy table. We've created our first table. We see that we've had this successfully done because it alternates colors. and we are feeling great and good to go. Ladies and gentlemen, we are halfway done through our data discovery. I hope we're enjoying this so far. I'm not seeing as many comments. I hope I'm not losing people, but we are definitely getting through this, I hope, in a way that's making an impact and sense to you. So in this situation, I replicated and I gave you a table in data 2A, and I call this data name table. So this is just the outcome of creating a table in table 2A, and that's the exercise completed for you. Now in table 3, in data 3, here I want to insert a slicer. I want to add slicers. We covered this last Tech Tuesday. How do we add slicers? In order for us to add a slicer, I have to click somewhere in my table. In order for us to add slicers, which is just a fancy name for filter, I have to click somewhere in my table. Notice this table name is data 3. It's data 3. It's not the same as my table over here, which is table 2, which is just data. Every table has to have a unique name. You can't have them replicating. So in this circumstance where I want to create slicers, I'm going to show you what they look like in 3A. Here's what the successful outcomes look like. Here's my slicer for primary program. Here's my slicer for gender, higher education, parent 1 and parent 2, and then the GED completion. We're going to do that ourselves, and it's very simple, I think, after we practice this together. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a mistake on purpose. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to click outside of my table, and I'm going to go, this is what you don't want to do, but I'll show you what to do if you get the error. If I click outside my table and I say, okay, I want to insert a slicer. I want to go ahead and insert, gosh, where do I see my slicer? Oh my goodness, oh, here it is, it's under my insert. And sometimes people go to this insert to insert their slicer. This is inserting cells. This is inserting types of rows or columns of data. You can insert sheets. Under this insert, next to the home tab, we can actually see that we want to insert slicer, and it falls under this filter category. So for us, I'm going to click on slicer, and notice when I do so here, it gives me this weird outcome. I don't know what this means. Connections. Why do I have connections in Excel? I don't need to connect anywhere, but just the outcomes to what I have to put in for my grant proposal or to submit about our success outcomes. I don't need to make any connections. So this is a situation where Excel can't identify the table that you want to add the slicers for. Fixing this, I'm just going to X out or hit cancel. When I click inside my table and I insert my slicer, now it gives me my options to add in my slicers. So again, you have to be clicked in that table somewhere to tell Excel how to find the slicer options, which are just the field headers. So I want to add these 5 slicers, and here I put the instructions on how to do it. We're going to go to insert, highlighting insert. Once we highlight insert, oh, we're getting more people. Wonderful. It's great to see some more of our colleagues. We're going to go to insert. We're going to come over here to the filters area. We're going to click on slicer. And now it's just as simple as clicking to add them. I want to add primary program of study. So I click on this first one and put a check mark. Just that simple. I want to add gender. I scroll down, I put a check mark next to gender. Okay, I want highest ed parent 1, highest ed parent 2, check mark. And lastly, I want GED completion date. GED completion date. Then you're just going to have to read them. And unfortunately, I'm reading. There's no way for us to sort this right now. We can at a later time, but for right now, this orients vertically as your headers do horizontally. So GED completion date is going to be 3 columns from the end of your table. So when I click on all 5 of those simultaneously, I have 5 check marks, and I click OK. Now every one of those slicers add in, and you can move these all around. You can move them up and down and left and right. You can make them wider. You can make them skinny. For example, here in our highest education, some people do not like working in this way because they like seeing the entire header name. Some people like to see the data in a different fashion. They like to maybe see the slicers orient using a reverse alphabetical method. There's a lot of different ways you can orient this. I'm not going to dive into that as in depth. This is more of a broad overview. But if you do want to change the orientation of your slicers, you would right click on the slicer and you would click on the slicer heading. So you would click on the unique slicer and you would say, what is the slicer settings? Here you can replace the header name. So you could call this parent 1 ed. You can say that you want the outcomes to be descending and click OK. And that would change the header row here to something that might be more relevant to your users. You might be sending this to a supervisor, or to a principal, or a dean, a vice president potentially, or maybe a member of an outside organization that wants to dive into data collaboratively. And this might be more relevant to someone that's using it. Hopefully we're understanding this. If you did not get that, that's okay. These slicers are replicated for you in our table 3A, And I love using slicers. I love using slicers when it comes to data, because often we just have to find groups of students or groups of data. And we have to filter down because there might be queries that we have to answer, like how many students do we have that are Hispanic? How many students do we have that are Hispanic that maybe have parent one or parent two that have gotten a graduate degree? Those are questions that might want to ask, and there's ways we could do that with slicers pretty easily. So we're going to come over here to all student data 4, and I'm going to ask some questions of us, and I'll zoom in on these, and I will let you know that in table 4A, I've answered those questions. And depending upon your sheet, if you have a value of 6 here, please know that that is not correct. So in table 4A, this value should be 21. But there was an incorrect outcome here. So just note that you might have a version that I updated accidentally, and of putting a value that was not correct there. So I am fallible. I do make mistakes. Sometimes I get so excited and I have to check myself. So I do sometimes, I have to do data and I do analytics one way, and then I do another way to check that I didn't miss a keystroke, and it happens to the best of us. So now the nice thing about using these slicers in our data is that we want to dive in to say, how many female students are in this population? Okay, if I want to determine how many females, all I do is come and click on female in my gender role. This filters our data. And in doing so, I'm able to see down here in the bottom left, I have 205 females. So this is a very powerful tool for filtering inside of your data tables. I can reset my filter by clicking on that little chalice that's there with the X. So again, I have my 205. I hit the chalice with the X, and that goes ahead and gets rid of it. So here I have 205. We can see over here that we have that 205. Now, how many adult ESOL college and career readiness students are there? That's going to come from our program of study. Notice I can't see all of it, so I could either elongate this slicer, and that'll allow us to see this a little bit better, and it expands, or I can hover over, and it will actually create a subtext box below, and it'll expand out the words that are missing. So here, if I click on this, I can see that we only have 4 adult ESOL college and career readiness students that are in this data set. So that's a way for us to quickly identify that population. How many students have 2 parents that have no schooling? Okay, so that means both parent 1 and parent 2 have to have no school. So that's the first filter. Now we're going to have to join a second filter, and it's just that simple by clicking on both of them. So here we have 2 sets of data that have no schooling. And just as a reference, why did these change colors and they became a lighter blue? It's because there's no more relevant population left in this current filtered set that would apply to any of these fields. So that's why we have some that are light shaded blue, and then these are dark shaded blue, because we still have populations in our filtered data set that exist. So notice here, it's so easy for us to then identify and reset our filters. How many male students completed their GED before 2023? This is a cool trick. So in this situation, we can see that my GED completion is oriented in a chronological order. I start here in 2003 and go all the way down to 2023. I have some blank ones. So if I want to add fields together, if I left click on them independently, it just filters by unique click. So if I want to add, I would click on this icon with multiple checks and say this is a multi-select, and I could add in all of the students who graduated before 2023. So I use the multi-select box to do so, and I'm doing before 2023, so I would stop here. But also the question that asked is how many of these students are males? So notice here the question is how many students are males, so I would click on that male population, and then I could see that. So there's a lot of things that we can do here by diving into our data and figuring this out together. And lastly, how many adult education or GED students are females with both parents that have completed graduate school? This is a filtering on multiple different fields. On 3, we have adult education or GED students. So I'm going to click on adult education. add my multi-select, and then I'm going to come down here and click GED because it says adult education or a GED. So I want to click on both of these. Are females with both parents that have completed graduate school, graduate and graduate. And notice that's an easy way for us to identify these 9 students that have fit the criteria that was asked here in question number 5. A very powerful outcome. One way that we can use slicers, and it's extremely a viable option for us. So hopefully we all make sense here. The answers in table 4A. We're going to jump into table 5. And in table 5, we are going to create these pivot tables and these pivot visualizations. And in order to do so, we're going to have to use the same table. We're going to use the same table. And I was very creative because under table design, it's table data 3A567. That was just a random value that I used. And this is table name data 3A567. So the first visual that I'm going to create is my enrollment by program of study. And if you want to reference that, it's going to be under the enrollment visualization. I'm going to recreate this one. So for our purposes right now, I'm going to take a picture. I'm going to take a picture, and I'm going to work this through so we can understand this together in our visual. So in our visual, we want to create this enrollment by program. In order to do so, we're going to click anywhere on our table. We're going to go to Insert, and we want to insert a pivot chart. And people say, well, Mike, well, okay, well, why are you doing a pivot chart and not a pivot table? And remember, we're visuals. We're visual people. We like to see visual representations on top of the data. It makes sense. So you have the ability to either create a pivot table or create a pivot chart. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you a secret that if you create a pivot chart, you'll automatically get the pivot table. So I always say, if you don't need the chart, you can delete it. But that way you get both and you can use it at any given time. So I'm going to create a pivot chart. Here it says, what's the table data that you want to use? And notice I have data 3A567. That was the table name that we used. I'm going to select that. I already knew that's what I wanted. It highlights it for you. And I'm going to say, where do you want this new pivot chart to be? And I'm going to say, give me a new worksheet, because I'm going to put this all on a new worksheet. And I'm going to click OK. And notice it adds this pivot table, and it adds in this visual is blank visual aid. So in this circumstance, awesome. I see some good thumbs up. We're getting it. I appreciate the confirmation there. Fantastic. Great. Thank you so much for keeping me in the loop. So we want to create this by our program of study. And just to keep in mind what that looked like, I'm gonna put the picture of that visual that we want to create here. If your pivot chart fields ever go away, you can left click anywhere on your data and we'll add them back in. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add enrollment by program. So if you can't find it readily, you can type it in the search bar. And so I'm going to type program, primary program of study. And that's going to be the field we're going to use for program. I'm going to drop it down into my axis, and I don't see anything. Oh man, why don't I see anything? You always have to tell the pivot chart you want to count something. It has to always have a value here. This is the different categories, your y-axis and your x-axis. You always have to tell it to count something. And in this situation, we want to tell it to count the student IDs, because remember we said the student IDs are unique. We don't want to use the last name or the first name because sometimes they may not be unique. Student IDs in this situation are unique. And when I do so, here is our visual outcome and our pivot table. So we have our pivot table and our pivot chart. And this is like creating any nice graph in Excel. The big difference here is that I say, okay, I want to create a pie chart. Okay, I want to create a pie chart. Okay, notice here, if I want to change this from a visual bar graph to a pie chart, all I have to do is click on format. I'm sorry, I click on design, not format. I click on design, and I say up here, I want to change the chart type. And this will allow you to pick any of these different visual analytic tools that Excel inherently provides. So I'm going to say, okay, let's give me a pie chart, and it actually allows me to see what the pie chart will look like. So I'm going to convert this to a pie chart. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good so far. And I say, okay, this is great, but on our real one, I like having the pointers of what each one of these fields are. Gotcha, I got you. No worries there. I'm going to drag this over. When you come over here and you click on the plus, we can say that we want to add the chart title. We can also take it away. It'll re-update your field. If we want to add some labels, we can go ahead and say that we want to put them in the center. We want to do a call out. Notice here it's changing as I highlight over. You can move and see what it'll look like. I'm going to say that I want a call out. You can say, you know what, I appreciate having a legend. I just want it at the bottom. Or I want to look at more options, and you can look at more options as well, and that'll present them over here. You can also just come on here and hit delete, and it'll delete it too. So if you don't need the legend, that is fine as well. There's nothing that says you have to have the legend, and that's completely okay. So in here, there's some great things that we can work through this, and you can at any time if you want to. You can update this. You can change the coloring if you want to. You can change the orientation of your field outcomes. I'm going to change. I'm just going to, for just our purposes of time, I'm going to keep a lot of these, and I'm going to change this to enrollment by program. I just typed and double clicked, and now I have my enrollment by program. I put that off in the far right, and that's the way that we're able to dive into a lot of these. At any time, if you ever want to try more or check things out, there's always a way for you to go back. And that's why I like this so much, is that you can just use this and you can look at the different styles. I just default, and you can actually use one like this. You can come here. There's so many different styles that you can use, and you can find something that works visually for you in your presentation. And this tends to be a very powerful option as well. So something that helps you can change colors. If you like different color palettes, it actually recommends some. But for all means and purposes, we're going to just create this one right here. I'm going to get rid of this legend. I'm just going to come on here and click off of it. I don't like this legend. And I'm just going to keep this one. It's not the exact same thing, but that's okay. So notice here that was created in my sheet 1. This was created in my sheet 1. So some people might say, well, here, can I highlight this and insert another pivot chart? Well, let's try. You could go back to your original data, which is going to be under your table 5A, under your table 5, and you can insert a pivot chart here. But some people have asked, hey, if I highlight this, can I insert another pivot chart? And we might say, well, let's just try one. Let me just try inserting a graph here. And this is another graph of the same thing. So sometimes you can have the same chart represented in multiple different ways using different visual acuities. And that, again, is something that you could use, and you can never break it because you can always delete it and add it back in. So now we have our first enrollment by program. Now we want to add in here another visual aid, and notice this is back in our table 5. We want to add in average attendance by program and gender. Okay, this one's a little bit more complicated, but let's go ahead and look at what it looks like, average attendance by program and gender. We love the term average because that helps us relate situations that sometimes are not easily related, sometimes easily relatable. So in that situation, we want to create a visual that allows us to create that middle value that's right up there. Hopefully that when we work through this, we're able to do so and see some outcomes and how they can change, but this is the goal that we're going to want to get. I'm going to come back over here to my all student data 5. I'm going to click anywhere on my table, and I'm going to say I need to insert a new pivot chart. And I'm going to put this into an existing worksheet. So it highlighted and found the original table. I don't want to put this in a new worksheet. I want to put this in my sheet 1 that I created here. So I'm going to say, I want to put this into an existing worksheet. It says, what's the location? Where do you want to put it? So I'm going to click on existing location. I'm going to click on the location bar. You can actually click this up arrow and this down arrow, but that's really not relevant. It just either hides everything or keeps it there. But if I click on sheet 1 and I click, for example, here, it places that location in here. So all I did was I came from my original sheet, and I'll show it one more time. I go from my sheet 5, I insert a pivot chart, and I go to existing worksheet, and I go to my location, I go to sheet, and I say, put it here, this is where I want to see it, and I hit enter, it expands this back out. I don't click add this data to a data model. We could do that at a later time, but for right now, we'll keep this outside the data model, and we'll click OK, and notice it adds a new pivot chart. And remember, we wanted to create this visual aid. We wanted to create this visualization. I'm going to put this here for all of us to see. I'm going to hide our old one. And this sometimes helps to understand at this point what we want to create. I see I have my program here. So I'm going to drop that into my vertical axis component. I am going to then add in the average attendance hours. So if I don't know where that is, you can actually type in keywords under my fields, and I'm going to drop that into my values. We always know that numerical outcomes will be values. And notice, oh my goodness, we're getting some big differences here. And that's the reason why we like means of central tendency. We like the mean, we like the medians, because right now we just see adult education. This form is just really big compared to everything else. And that's because there's a lot more adult education students. As we see here, we have 226 adult education students. We expect them to have more hours. And what this did was that it summed the total hours. But now we also want to bring in gender, and we want to bring in gender to identify our population differences between gender and program. So let's say that I just added that in here. Let's say I just added that in here. It doesn't look like we like it. It doesn't look as nice, but I'm going to drag this over just to see how it looks as my legend. And this actually allows me to disaggregate my vertical program of study by gender. It actually colors them here. And that's what we have from our original visual. So by doing so, I'm going to expand out here. And now I realize that I'm missing some of these great numerical values. I don't want to estimate this vertically. I mean, horizontally. Actually, I want to drop this in. So I'm going to click on my plus sign and I say, go ahead and add those data labels and let's keep them there. But notice this is the sum of total attendance hours. This request specifically said, give us the average attendance hours. The sum is too large because our population is disproportionate. Let's determine average, but I don't want to calculate that average by hand. I don't want to do that. So what we learned last Tech Tuesday was that if we come down to our values in the bottom right, we can highlight or left click on this field, and we're going to go to value field settings. So I'll give everyone a second to come down to these values because Excel will do a lot of these calculations for you so you don't have to do it. And that's the way I prefer. I don't have to do these calculations by hand. That's too complex, but it can do it for you very quickly too. When we click on the sum of total attendance and left click here, value field settings, now it says, okay, do I want to sum this? What do you want to do with your calculation? No, ma'am, no, sir. I want to take an average. And when I take an average and I click OK, it averages out these values. And notice how it proportionalizes our data. And all of a sudden, when adult education had this huge different disparity, I can see that I see a larger disparity in my GED population. I can see females have an average of 203 attendance hours, where males only have an average of 76. That is a big flag saying something's going on. We got to investigate that. And we only see this so rapidly because it's a visual aid. Just as a thought here, notice that my data fields are going in infinite. They're going out infinitely. They're running on forever. You can actually tell Excel to round this for you, and I'll show you how to do that as well. That's going to be back here in your average of total attendance hours under your values field. We're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to dive into this by left-clicking, value field settings like we did before, and we're going to be at the same choice. But now instead of changing the type of calculation, we're going to click on number format. And when we do so, we can say, hey, let's give me a number, but I don't want to go two places. I want you to round, don't give me any decimals. I don't want any decimals. Just click this down to 0. When I click OK and click OK, it's then going to change this to 124, 114. So it's a nice value. We're not, that hour, the hundredth and thousandth digit of the attendance isn't going to make a difference in the long term. So that is very powerful. Let's say I want to introduce my chart title. I can click that over here. If I want to put my axis titles, I can put those in here. In order to update them, just double click in them. So I'm just going to type here, average attendance hours by program and gender. Here, I just double click on this axis title, my vertical axis, and I'll just type average hours here. And then sometimes you have to turn your head. Under this axis title, I'm going to type program of study because we should always have a title for the horizontal and vertical axis. And we are feeling pretty good about that, like such. Hopefully we're familiarizing ourselves with the powers that happens. This, if you had to do this manually or using Excel formulae, this could take hours to do. And notice we have a great graphical representation here of our populations broken down by gender and their hours of attendance, something super powerful. And in this situation, now we have two visual aids that we've created. So we have our first and our second. We are getting close to the time, so I want to show us how to add slicers. Here, I want to show us how to add slicers. So in this situation, in order for me to add a slicer, when I click on Insert and I click Slicer, Notice I get the slicer, but look where I was clicked. I was clicked in a table. Notice if I'm out here, I may not have that same option. And when I'm not clicked in that table, it gives me this weird funky box again. It says, hey, I don't know. What's the connection? I always don't know about connections. It's very emotional. Sometimes Excel is very emotional. I hope you all got the joke. I was trying to make one. The existing connection doesn't exist, but here you're telling Excel that you want to create slicers based off of the data associated with this table. And in this situation here, we are going to add the slicer, and I'm going to add some slicers here. I'm going to add primary program. I'm going to add gender. I'm going to add higher education of parent 1 and parent 2. And let's say that we want to add nation of citizenship. And you can pick anything you want at this point. This will add all of your slicers to this. And the best part about this is that when we click on them, and I'm just going to drag them over, when we click on them, at this point, it's going to only update this table. Notice what I did is that it only updated this table, and you say, Mike, you've lied to us. Mike, what happened? You said it's going to impact all of our visuals. You have to tell Excel to make the connection. And this is where we're going to get the connection. So we picked this table to add these slicers, but we want to say, Excel, please apply these slicers to all visual aids. And the way you do that is by when you left click on these outcomes here, and you see that they are available to choose. When you dive into your pivot table and you look at these ability to add slicers, you are able at this point to look at connections. And connections are very powerful because it allows us to join your data at any given time. So I'm going to add in, for example, another slicer. And let's say here, we're going to do a connection. We're going to insert the slicer, and I'm going to add in, let's see here. Let's look at our Hispanic ethnicity. Now, I added in this extra slicer. Notice here, my slicer tab has opened, and there's a report connection box that's available here on the top left. When I click on this report connection, Excel actually recognizes that right now, all these slicers are only applying to the pivot table 2, the second one we put in. We want to say, Excel, please apply this to all pivot tables that you have on the screen. Click OK. And now by doing so, you are then telling Excel to add and update the pivot tables, the pivot slicers for the selected value outcome. So notice here, we have to tell gender to also report that connection, make that connection. We have to tell primary program to make that connection. We have to tell highest ed parent 1 to make that connection. Awesome. Thank you so much, Don. Isn't that awesome? And the best part is, I'm going to tell you something really cool about this. We're going to tell each one of these to make that connection. When you tell it to make that connection once, it will always make that connection. If you add any more fields, if you add any more slicers, you just have to tell them to make that connection. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, you guys are amazing. Just make sure that you want to tell it to add that connection. And now when we dive in, it'll change all of your visuals because you made that connection using this common data table. So I hope, thank you so, I'm seeing such great outcomes. I hope this has helped spark some ideas. I will tell you all in our next session, we're going to talk about how to dynamically update this with new data without having to redo all of this calculations. And yes, we're going to advance this one step. So do know that that is coming up. I am going to go ahead and I have not finished. We didn't get to go through all these. Of course, we got ambitious, but I have put the answers in there for you. Let's go ahead and reshare our PowerPoint for IPDay. And there's a survey that's here. In this survey, we would like to get your feedback about this session because that helps us grow as a professional organization. Remind you that tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, thank you so much, we have another session called IET Programs and Student Success Plans. And that's going to be another great way for us to evaluate our IET programs and success plans associated with our students. I appreciate all of you. I'm so glad. Oh, this makes me, I wish I could share them in the comments because when we are sparking this and we were getting ideas, it's okay. I understand it. I'm in a different time zone too. I'm actually in Central Standard Time. So it happens to me as well. Thank you so much, Marie-Luz. I hope you all got a chance to enjoy this, and this is going to help you in your day-to-day endeavors. And we appreciate you on behalf of IPDAY and hope you can join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for IT programs and student success plans. Thank you so much, colleagues and friends.